Researchers who take Bigfoot seriously don't take every alleged Bigfoot video seriously. In fact, they're often the first to call foul on the fakers. So when they tell us they've seen video they think is legit, we take a look too.
The mist clung to the mountains like a shroud that September morning in 2010, and somewhere within its gray embrace, two experienced hikers were about to disappear forever. What happened to Jonathan Yette and Rachel Bagnall in that British Columbia wilderness remains one of the most chilling mysteries of our time. A mystery that connects to a web of encounters so terrifying, they challenge everything we thought we knew about what lurks in North America's deepest forests. The couple who never came home. September 2nd, 2010, started like any other adventure for 34-year-old Jonathan Yette and his girlfriend Rachel Bagnall. Both seasoned hikers, they had mapped out a perfect 3-day trek in British Columbia, planning a scenic route that would end at the pristine Valentine Lake. It was supposed to be their last adventure together before life pulled them in different directions. Rachel would volunteer at a children's welfare center, and Jonathan would return to the United States. But the woods had other plans. After entering the trail on September 4th, they simply vanished. Days later, their car sat abandoned near a remote trailhead, doors unlocked, keys inside. Their phones, camera, and hiking gear remained untouched, as if they had simply evaporated into the mountain air. The photos on their camera told a story that would haunt investigators for years. Happy couple shots documented their journey, but hidden among the innocent memories were images that defied explanation. One showed a distant bear-like figure trailing them through the trees. Another captured a massive tree, bent and crushed as if something of enormous strength had simply walked through it. But it was the videos that truly chilled investigators to the bone. The first video, filmed the night before their disappearance, showed something that shouldn't exist. Outside their hotel window, a humanoid figure lurked in the darkness, its oversized hands brushing against the glass. Jonathan was captured on film calling the police, his voice tight with fear. By the time authorities arrived, the figure had melted back into the night. The second video was far more disturbing. Deep in the woods, it captured the couple's final moments of normalcy as they reacted to sounds that had no earthly explanation. Whistling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, branches snapping with deliberate rhythm, movement just beyond the camera's reach. Jonathan's hands trembled as he zoomed in on a broad, motionless figure partially hidden in the trees, staring straight at him with an intelligence that was decidedly not animal. Search efforts launched immediately. Police, volunteers, search dogs, hundreds of people combed every inch. They found nothing. No gear, no remains, just a few scattered footprints that led nowhere and one missing hat that didn't even belong to the couple. Most telling of all, the search dogs, trained to track in the most challenging conditions, simply refused to go further at a certain point, whimpering and backing away from something their human handlers couldn't perceive. Here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Jonathan's camera and phone were found in their car, yet the couple had never returned. Did Jonathan somehow make it back alone, only to encounter something that forced him to return to the forest? Why would he leave behind the very tools that could save his life? 14 years later, the last thing recorded on that camera has never been made public. What truth lies buried in those final frames? What unthinkable violence might they contain? And in a twist that seems ripped from a horror novel, the innkeeper who had witnessed that first terrifying video also vanished in 2022 under similarly mysterious circumstances, as if the mountain was systematically erasing everyone who had glimpsed its secrets. The towering shadow of 2023. Fast forward to 2023, when a lone hiker captured what might be the most convincing Sasquatch footage ever recorded. The clip quietly disappeared from the internet until recently, and what makes this encounter different isn't just the creature's unmistakable shape, it's the sheer, impossible size. The man was trekking up a dirt slope when he heard something that made his blood run cold. Heavy movement behind him, like thick brush being torn apart by something that didn't care about stealth. When he turned, his camera captured something that towered among the trees like a living nightmare. The footage is blurry, but when slowed down, the outline becomes unmistakable. Broad shoulders that could belong to no human, arms that hung with unnatural length, a domed head that suggested intelligence, and legs that covered ground with strides no person could match. This thing stood at least 9 or 10 feet tall, maybe more. But here's what separated this sighting from the classic Bigfoot image burned into popular culture. This creature wasn't bulky. It was tall, lean, but still radiating a power that suggested it could tear a person apart without effort. The face appeared lighter than the body, and for one heart-stopping moment, its eyes caught the light and glowed with an otherworldly glint. The hiker didn't stick around for a better look. He caught those few precious seconds of footage and ran, his survival instincts overriding his curiosity. No details were shared about the location, likely a deliberate choice to avoid drawing crowds of thrill-seekers who might not be as lucky in their encounters. Critics argue the creature looks too tall to be Bigfoot, but they're missing a crucial point. Reported sightings have ranged from 6 to 15 feet tall. What if we've been wrong about there being just one type of creature out there? What if we're dealing with an entire species, with different sizes and characteristics? The night watchman's terror. Sometimes the most chilling encounters happen when you're just trying to do your job. In the summer of 1961, a night watchman stepped onto his factory porch for a simple coffee break. His workplace stood isolated between Big Rapids and Chippewa Lake, Michigan, with nothing but dense hay marsh stretching into the darkness behind the building. Around 3 a.m., he noticed movement by the chain-link fence. Expecting a trespasser, he reached for his gun, ready to confront what he assumed was a human intruder. What he saw defied every assumption about what walks upright in the night. It was taller than any man, broader than seemed possible, covered in brown-gray hair that seemed to absorb the factory lights. But most unsettling of all was how it moved, shifting between 4 legs and 2 as it paced under the lights, as if it couldn't decide whether it wanted to be a beast or something approaching human. With hands trembling from more than just the Michigan cold, he slipped inside and grabbed his 35mm Kodak camera. When he returned to the porch, the creature had stepped fully into view, and he managed to capture one long exposure photograph before it dropped to all fours and disappeared into the trees with a speed that seemed to mock the laws of physics. That photograph ran in a 1962 Fringe magazine, which later vanished as if someone wanted the evidence buried. But the negative remains, locked away with the camera, a tangible piece of proof that something walked through that hay marsh on a summer night in 1961. No one has ever gone back to find out what it was. When the government captures the impossible. Sometimes the most credible evidence comes from the most unexpected sources. While surveying storm damage in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, National Weather Service officials captured more than just fallen trees in their documentation photos. In the background of one image, behind a snapped trunk, stood a shadowy, towering figure that was larger than any human had a right to be. The location was significant. Fayette County, deep in the hilly, forested terrain near the Allegheny Mountains. It's a quiet, remote country where a person could disappear without a trace, or where something could hide without being discovered. When the National Weather Service posted the photo online, the internet exploded with speculation. The figure in the background was unmistakable, too tall, too broad, positioned in a way that suggested it was watching the survey team work. Most unsettling of all, the man in the foreground seemed completely unaware of what loomed behind him. Local explanations emerged quickly. Some residents are known to place life-sized iron or wooden statues in their yards to provoke curiosity and conversation. But this figure didn't look crafted. It looked alive, caught in a moment of observation before melting back into the forest. In 2013, someone spotted an 8-foot prehistoric-looking figure. But this latest photo came from a weather team, trained professionals with no interest in spreading hoaxes or conspiracy theories. They dismissed it as nothing significant. Others weren't so sure. What exactly did the National Weather Service capture that day in the woods of Fayette County? And why does this quiet part of Pennsylvania keep drawing the attention of something that prefers to remain hidden? The terror of Northern Ontario. In the remote communities of Northern Ontario, something massive has been terrorizing locals, and multiple eyewitnesses have captured evidence that defies rational explanation. Near Fort Frances and Fort Hope, residents report encounters with what can only be described as Sasquatch, towering beings walking on 2 legs, leaving enormous footprints, and vanishing into thick forests moments after being spotted. One video, recorded near Redgut Bay in early spring, shows a shadowy figure with what appears to be an impossibly long arm and massive hand moving through the woods. When enhanced with filters, the footage reveals details that confirm the presence of something far beyond ordinary wildlife, something that walks upright but moves with a fluidity that suggests it belongs to the forest in ways humans never could. This isn't an isolated incident. Around Fort Hope, residents have reported huge humanoid creatures throwing rocks and uprooting small trees near their homes, often traveling in pairs or even groups. The footprints they leave behind measure between 14 and 19 inches, much too large for any known animal, and some witnesses describe beings over 8 feet tall. What makes these sightings particularly chilling is their timing. Reports spike every spring, with locals describing eerie, childlike cries at dawn. These sounds often coincide with smaller footprints found beside the larger ones, hinting at a possible family structure living deep in the forest. The video evidence shows deep footprints in packed sand, spaced about 5 feet apart, vanishing into marshland too quiet and too wide for human passage. Despite rising reports and mounting evidence, the mystery only deepens. What are these beings, and how do they stay hidden in an age of satellite imagery and GPS tracking? More importantly, what happens if they decide to stop hiding? The hunter who fled. Bob was a seasoned hunter who thought he knew every sound the Pennsylvania woods could make. Deep in Allegheny National Forest, just before dawn during deer season, he heard strange grunts that he initially mistook for deer. Then came a low growl that made his blood freeze. When Bob turned toward the sound, something enormous emerged from the dense brush. Almost 9 feet tall and more than 3 feet wide, it moved effortlessly through undergrowth that would challenge a human, towering and silent, only 75 yards away. Fear overwhelmed training and experience. Bob fled, abandoning his hunt and his pride, but the encounter left an unerasable mark on him. Since then, curiosity has drawn him back, joining others who hunt not for deer, but for answers in Pennsylvania's wilds. Meanwhile, far away in North Carolina, a boy named John grew up knowing every forest sound around Hiassee Lake. Nothing prepared him for the terrible stench that hit him like poison one fall morning, a smell worse than the deadliest skunk. Then came a splash in the water from an impossible source, a giant rock hurled from nowhere by something with the strength to treat boulders like pebbles. Years later, during a deer hunt on a ridge, John sat frozen as a huge black figure emerged from the shadows. Standing over 7 feet tall with arms hanging low and slow, heavy steps, it moved silently across the clearing with a grace that seemed to mock its massive size. Terror overwhelmed him that day. John abandoned hunting forever, unable to return to woods that had revealed something beyond his understanding. Both stories hint at creatures that exist in the spaces between the known and unknown, beings that are neither bear nor man, hidden in America's deepest woods, revealing themselves only in brief, terrifying glimpses before disappearing back into the shadows. The smoking Sasquatch of Georgia. In rural Georgia, a man's morning routine became a nightmare that would challenge everything he thought he knew about reality. When he let his dog out one morning, it barked non-stop at the cellar door. Then came the smell, faint cigarette smoke drifting up from below. The next morning, half their chickens were gone. Giant footprints circled the coop in a pattern that suggested intelligence and planning rather than random predation. Desperate for answers, he set up a camera. The footage showed something that defied belief. A massive, ape-like creature stealing chickens with a cigarette dangling from its mouth. When he rushed outside with a gun, nothing was there, vanished at sunrise as if it had never existed. But the encounters weren't over. Something thumped on the roof and crashed through the ceiling, landing on their kitchen table. His wife, acting on pure instinct, stabbed it with a fork. The creature screamed, a sound that was neither human nor animal, and fled into the night. Later, their neighbor Mr. Woods confessed that the creature had been living in his shed for about a year. But what he captured on video in the woods behind his property was even more disturbing. The footage shows the creature walking into frame like it owned the forest, towering, hairy, and gripping a live chicken. There was no sound, no frantic struggle, just an oddly calm march into the trees. The way it held the chicken wasn't savage, it was deliberate, controlled. This wasn't how a predator behaves. Why risk the noise of a live chicken? Why not kill it first? Something about the scene felt staged, too human in its calculation. Viewers quickly pointed out the proportions. It moved too fluidly, lacking the wild gait known from older Bigfoot footage. Some swore it was a man in an impossibly sophisticated suit. Others argued the suit was too smooth, too well fitted, too expensive for a simple prank. But everyone kept circling back to that chicken. It didn't make sense in any context, bait, symbol, or mistake in an otherwise convincing performance. The boy who followed the wrong footprints. December 5, 1998, was supposed to be a simple family tradition for the Ingridsons. Every year, they ventured into Oregon's remote Fremont-Winnea National Forest to collect Christmas trees. But that year, something went terribly wrong, creating one of the state's most baffling cold cases. 9-year-old Derek Ingebrigtsen was full of energy and excitement as his grandfather and father scouted for the perfect trees. When Derek dashed ahead into the snow, he spotted a set of footprints and, thinking they belonged to his dad, followed them deeper into the woods. But those prints weren't Robert's. They were much larger, much deeper, made by something that had no business walking upright in those mountains. When the family reunited minutes later and realized Derek wasn't with either of them, panic set in immediately. They followed the trail, but nature seemed determined to erase all evidence. A blizzard rolled in, visibility dropped to nothing, and the forest swallowed their son as completely as if he had never existed. Robert sprinted down the mountain and flagged a driver for help. Police arrived with helicopters, dogs, and hundreds of volunteers. Searchers found a snow angel near a trail, a child's last moment of play before something unthinkable happened. They also discovered a small shelter made from thick branches that no child could snap, constructed with a knowledge of wilderness survival that Derek didn't possess. 3 days in, the search dogs, trained to track in the most challenging conditions, picked up nothing. Instead, they howled in terror, a sound that chilled experienced handlers who had never seen their animals react with such primal fear. After a week, officials called off the search. The family kept looking. Then came the rumors that would haunt the case for decades. A hunter's photo from 2022 showed a deer being stalked by a large, shadowy figure in the same general area where Derek had vanished. The image was blurry, but the proportions were unmistakable. Too tall, too broad, moving with a predator's patience through terrain where Derek had last been seen. Investigators noted dozens of similar child disappearances in Oregon's forests over the decades. What's striking is that most of these cases were never solved, creating a pattern that suggests something systematic, something that understands how to make people disappear without leaving evidence that human investigators can follow. Derek's father, Robert, never stopped searching. Even now, decades later, a faded missing poster still hangs from one of them, a monument to a boy who followed the wrong footprints and vanished into a mystery that refuses to be solved. The pattern emerges. Consider the evidence. Creatures that range from 6 to 15 feet tall, suggesting not a single species, but possibly an entire ecosystem of beings we've never properly cataloged. They demonstrate intelligence, building shelters, using tools like cigarettes, traveling in groups, and showing what appears to be family structures with adults and young. They're geographically widespread, yet they remain hidden, suggesting an understanding of human behavior and technology that allows them to avoid detection when they choose to. Most disturbing of all, they seem to be watching us. In our age of smartphones and security cameras, of satellite imagery and GPS tracking, how do these creatures remain hidden? The answer might be more unsettling than their existence itself. They've adapted to our technology. Notice how the clearest footage always seems to disappear from the internet, how the most compelling evidence gets buried or dismissed. It's as if there's a systematic effort to keep this evidence from reaching critical mass, from building into undeniable proof. Whether this is the work of the creatures themselves, demonstrating an understanding of human information systems that borders on the supernatural, or something else entirely, the pattern is clear. What emerges from these 8 encounters is a picture of North America's wilderness that most people aren't prepared to accept. Our forests aren't empty. They're inhabited by beings that have learned to coexist with human expansion by becoming masters of concealment and misdirection. They watch us from the shadows, study our behavior, and occasionally interact with us in ways that leave us questioning our sanity. They know when to reveal themselves and when to disappear. They know how to leave just enough evidence to plant doubt but never enough to provide proof. They know which humans will be believed and which will be dismissed as delusional. But what if we were wrong? What if we've been sharing this land with beings that chose to remain hidden rather than compete with us directly? What if every unexplained disappearance, every strange sound in the night, every glimpse of something that shouldn't exist is evidence of a parallel civilization that has been watching us all along? The most terrifying truth about these encounters isn't that they happened, it's that they're still happening and they're getting closer to home every day.